So, for the 200th anniversary, you helped compile an article for The Guardian, which was very interesting to read, about kind of giving a fresh spin on the novel. And you gave a very interesting portrayal of Lydia Bennet, which is very fun. But we look at Lydia Bennet we look at her kind of with some sort of superiority over her, because obviously we're on the side of Elizabeth and Darcy, and they're doing everything properly. Lydia runs off to Brighton and has all this illicit activity. But do you think Lydia was Jane's wild side coming out? Because we hear about Jane's flirting in the letters and things like that, and we hear things saying like Cassandra would have been shocked by Jane's flirting with Tom Lefroy. Do you think that Lydia was a little bit of Jane coming out?
I don't know, possibly, but what I love about Lydia is, what I think is so fascinating about Lydia is she doesn't punish her for her illicit sex.
No.
It's absolutely clear Lydia's sleeping with Wickham. There's no question about that. They go off to London together, they're in lodgings, and she writes and she says, oh, we'll marry sometime, it doesn't much signify. She's obviously having a high old time, and she doesn't get punished. Jane Austen refuses to punish her. Not like Eliza Williams in Sense and Sensibility, who has to die for her sexual transgression. Lydia is left to go unpunished. So I think she rather loved... And what I love about Lydia is she doesn't care what anybody thinks of her. And there's a moment when she's in an inn, and she says... And Elizabeth's saying, don't speak in front of the servant. And she says, oh, just like you. She says, look at him with his long chin and his nasty freckles, you know. And Elizabeth actually says she was thinking the same thing, but she daren't say it. So I love the fact that is Elizabeth being a hypocrite there, because she's thinking it, but she knows she can't say it. So it's a lovely idea that this might be Jane's wild side coming out, because this is what Jane Austen's imagining. Maybe one day young girls of 15 might be able to sleep around and not be punished.
It's a crazy thought. But kind of going on from that, you can tell each character in Jane Austen's novels, they're completely individual. Lydia's completely different to Elizabeth and Mary. And we were talking to John Mullin, and he thinks it's because Jane Austen gives them all their own voice. They've each got a separate way of thinking and speaking, and even with Mr. Hurst, who's only got one line in the entire novel, you know exactly it's Mr. Hurst saying those lines. How do you think she achieved that? How do you think she achieved creating those individual characters?
I mean, I think it's just a brilliant point. I mean, I love Mr. Palmer. And he probably only says about 3 or 4 things, but every single thing he says is hilarious. You know, and she has this incredible way, and I can just completely agree with John, that every single individual is alive to her, and she would think about... I mean, some characters don't say anything, but they make their presence felt. We don't even see the Doctor, we don't see Perry, ever. He's always off stage, and we feel like we know him intimately. So, I mean, and I think that's where she is unique. And again, I come back to how Shakespearean she is, because Shakespeare also creates utterly memorable, unforgettable characters. And what I would come back to with that is it's the detail. So I think Robert Ferrers, there's a detail, and he buys a toothpick, and he's in a shop, and I don't think it's coincidence that he buys an ivory one, because the ivory trade was pretty awful, and it might be a small, but and at that point he wouldn't even buy a pair of earrings for his sister. No, John Dashwood. It's John Dashwood, Edward Ferrers. I can't remember, but there's something about he wouldn't buy a pair of earrings, but he would buy an ivory laden toothpick, tiny little thing, and it's somehow that tiny thing tells us all we need to know about that character. So I think, and she creates these inner lives for each character. No character I think is too minor, and no major character is too. She's absolute. And it comes back to that flesh and blood, and how do you make them flesh? And she is unique in that, isn't she? And also, they're not stereotypes. They're not caricatures. That you feel it would be so easy. I love Fanny Burney, but many of her characters are caricatures. Whereas Jane Austen, she never creates caricatures. They're always human flesh and blood, breathing, living creatures. And I think that's why she's so unique, and that's why we don't forget. And the minor characters, you could write a book about the importance of minor characters, couldn't you?
Yeah, you could. All about Hill.
Yeah, Hill. Because I think these minor characters are all, and I mean, there's a moment when Sally the housemaid, when Lydia says, when she's living in sin in London, she says, tell Sally to mend the slit in my muslin gown. Now, that's not a sexual metaphor. I don't know what it is, because you think, love, your slit's not going to be mended anytime soon. But it's, you know, that is Jane Austen being naughty. But I love the fact Sally's got to sew up her slit. Now, think about that one. Not the usual image we think of with Jane Austen. And it's quite interesting that nobody's really picked up on that. But if I read again, I was really shocked when she says, tell Sally to mend my slit. And that, you know, the connotations of that. And I thought that's very similar to Mary Crawford when she goes over the spikes and Fanny says, don't go over the spikes, and that's a phallic symbol, you will tear your gown. What does Mary do? She elopes, she has sex with Henry Crawford, and she's destroyed forever. But so, you know, she's very into these sort of symbolic moments.
It's very naughty.
It's very naughty, but she's a Georgian. She's not a Victorian, she's a Georgian. And you make jokes about sex. You know, we know she made a joke about sodomy in the Navy, rears and vices. We must always remember Jane Austen is a Georgian.
And she's a joker as well.
And a joker. And nothing's off limits.
Exactly. So I think we'll leave it there. But thank you so much for coming in.
It's a pleasure.
And yes, you can also pick up Paula's book in our gift shop as well. So thank you very much, Paula.
Thank you for having me.